There was once a dark, ugly substance that seemed to belong nowhere a human hand would willingly reach. It was thick, black, foul-smelling, and for a long time people treated it as a curse whenever it rose from the ground. Yet this same substance would become one of the most desired materials on Earth. Nations would fight over it. Industries would be built around it. Fortunes would rise from it. And before long, traces of it would quietly enter almost every corner of ordinary life. The vehicles moving through city streets, the fibers inside clothing, the lipstick brushed across a face, the packaging wrapped around food, and even some of the ingredients that would eventually pass into the human body. Oil did not conquer the modern world all at once. It arrived piece by piece, slipping into one need after another, until people could no longer imagine life without it. But that raises a troubling question. How did something so crude, so dirty, so unwanted, manage to appear in nearly everything people use each day? To understand that, it helps to begin in Cleveland in 1862, in a city vibrating with movement. Cleveland was then a crucial transfer point between the eastern United States and the growing interior. Morning there did not wait for comfort. It began before the last traces of mist had lifted. Freight cars rolled in loaded with goods. Heavy sacks of grain were thrown onto platforms. Horse-drawn wagons lined the roads in long, stubborn rows. Laborers moved fast because delay cost money. And in a city, industrializing by the month, slowness was a form of weakness. On the second floor of a building near the station, a young man stood quietly watching the motion below. His name was John Rockefeller, and he was only 23 years old. 2 years earlier, he and a partner had formed a company that traded wheat, salted meat, and hay. It was the kind of business that looked practical from the outside, but felt unstable from within. Competition was fierce. Profit could vanish quickly. More than once, the company had seemed close to collapse. Then the American Civil War exploded, and with it came a surge in demand for food. Many merchants rushed goods onto the market as fast as they could. Rockefeller did something different. He waited until supply became scarce enough that few others had anything left to sell. Only then did he release his inventory. Prices rose fourfold, then sixfold. In a little over a year, the company earned $177,000, an immense fortune for that time. To most young businessmen, such success would have looked like confirmation. To Rockefeller, it looked like a warning. As he studied the revenue reports, his expression tightened. He sat at his desk and turned the pages again. Something was wrong. Not in the bookkeeping, not in the management, but deeper than that. Whenever war disrupted supply, prices climbed and profits rose. Whenever transport resumed and goods flooded back in, prices fell and revenue collapsed. The problem was obvious once he allowed himself to name it. He could negotiate shipping rates. He could cut costs. He could bargain better than most men around him. But he could not control supply. Wheat, grain, and meat depended on weather, harvests, labor, and timing. Change one of those conditions, and the entire business shifted with it. Food was essential, which meant everyone needed it. And because everyone needed it, everyone could try to sell it. Small firms entered the market constantly, all competing with nearly identical goods. There was no lasting control there, only pressure, fluctuation, and eventual elimination for the weak. If he remained in such a trade, Rockefeller understood, he would always be waiting on forces larger than himself. If he wished not merely to survive but to dominate, he would need a different road. At that time, before electric light had entered ordinary life, illumination itself was expensive. People relied heavily on whale oil. Compared with beeswax or animal fat, it burned with a steadier flame and less smoke. But it came at a high cost. Whaling voyages could last 2 to 4 years and demanded crews of strong men willing to risk everything on the open sea. Whale oil was therefore expensive, and even money could not always guarantee access to it. Demand for light kept growing. Textile mills, machine shops, and other industrial systems also depended on whale oil as a reliable lubricant. The more ships sailed out in search of whales, the more whale populations visibly declined. Within only a few decades, the pressure had become severe. Humanity needed another answer. A few hundred kilometers east of Cleveland, near Titusville, people had long known of a strange black liquid that interfered with their work. When they drilled salt wells to extract brine, this substance often contaminated the water and disrupted the process. In some places, it even rose visibly to the surface. Local people regarded it as a nuisance. They wanted it gone as quickly as possible. Then, in 1855, a chemistry professor began paying attention to this odd fluid. He studied it, distilled it, purified it, and discovered something startling. It could produce a lighting fuel more effective than whale oil. Suddenly, the nuisance looked different. If the substance could be refined into useful lamp fuel, then perhaps it was not waste at all. Perhaps the earth itself was holding an answer people had failed to recognize. So the question changed. No longer, how do we get rid of it? Now, how do we reach more of it? In 1858, a former railroad conductor named Edwin Drake decided to turn that question into action. He set out to drill for oil at its source. For more than a year, however, the results were miserable. Whenever the drill reached a certain depth, the soft earth above collapsed and trapped the boring equipment. Investors grew impatient. The small trickle of progress did not look like the beginning of an industry. By August of 1859, many were ready to walk away entirely. Drake made one last effort. He adapted a drilling method already used for salt wells. The solution sounded simple, almost unimpressive. Yet it changed everything. On the 27th of August 1859, the drill reached a depth of about 21 meters. The next morning, oil appeared. That was enough. The oil rush began. In the early 1860s, people poured into Titusville hoping to strike fortune from the ground. One newspaper joked that the discovery was good news for the whales. The joke carried truth. A substitute for whale oil had emerged. But Rockefeller was not looking at the discovery the way most others were. While crowds focused on immediate profit, he watched the structure of the market itself. At that stage, nearly anyone with around $300 could buy equipment and begin trying to make money. Many believed refining oil was simple. Distill it fast, keep whatever would burn, throw away the rest. The small refiners survived only because demand was enormous. But Rockefeller had already seen this pattern in food. As more people entered the trade, supply would swell, prices would fall, and profit would evaporate. Oil, for all its promise, looked dangerously familiar. Transport was another problem. Oil was commonly stored in 42-gallon wooden barrels. Each barrel cost about $2.50, and quality was inconsistent. They leaked. They could fall from boats or barges. They increased fire risk. Small refineries could only ship a few barrels at a time, which pushed costs even higher. Rockefeller came to a clear conclusion. As long as the oil trade remained disorganized, it was no more controllable than grain or meat. Then, near the end of 1863, the situation changed. The first railroad connecting Cleveland to the Pennsylvania oil regions was completed. That single line altered the economics of refining. Cleveland sat more than 100 miles from the oil fields, but it possessed advantages others did not: cheaper land, lower material costs, and access to the Erie Canal, which made shipping more flexible. For the first time, oil could be processed and distributed in a more organized way. What had been chaotic and local began to look systematic and scalable. At precisely that moment, an important figure entered Rockefeller's life. He did not come boasting about drilling wells. He came speaking about refining technology. At the time, most people focused only on separating kerosene from crude oil, because kerosene burned better for lighting than whale fat. But safe kerosene required more than crude heating and guesswork. Temperature had to be controlled with precision. Refining, Rockefeller realized, was not merely a rough trade. It was a process that could be disciplined. It could be measured. It could be improved. It could be controlled. That insight mattered more to him than the oil itself. After careful consideration, Rockefeller invested $4,000 to partner with Samuel Andrews. Together, they built the largest refinery in Cleveland, Excelsior Works. From the beginning, Rockefeller's philosophy was unmistakable. He did not buy insurance for the refinery. Instead, he invested in building systems strong enough to reduce risk internally. He hired his own repairmen and handled technical problems before they became disasters. The result was dramatic. Costs fell to nearly half what others spent reacting to breakdowns after the fact. He applied the same discipline to everything, even the smallest details. Barrels that once cost $2.50 each from outside suppliers became another target for control. Rockefeller bought his own oak timber, built drying kilns, and organized shipment of the wood to Cleveland. There, barrels were manufactured in large quantities using machines. Their cost fell to $1 each. By 1870, Rockefeller's operation had become a fully integrated refining machine. It controlled most of its own process from within. Every day, it could produce more than 1,500 barrels, more than many rivals made in an entire week. Unsurprisingly, its costs were far lower. This changed ordinary life more than people at the time could fully grasp. Before cheap kerosene, nighttime had been narrow and dim. Much of human activity ended when daylight disappeared. But as the price of kerosene fell, light became accessible. For as little as a cent an hour, even working families could keep a lamp burning. People could read after dark. They could work later. Households could remain active deep into the evening. A new rhythm of life emerged, and oil stood behind it. Yet kerosene's reign could not last forever. In 1879, Thomas Edison brought the electric light bulb into the world. For the first time, a cleaner and more stable source of illumination appeared, one no longer dependent on an open flame. It would have been reasonable to assume that oil might now become less important. If electricity took over lighting, what future remained for petroleum? The answer was hidden in what refiners had once thrown away. Crude oil, once lifted from the earth, is heated in a distillation tower. As temperature rises, the mixture separates according to boiling point. Lighter molecules vaporize and rise higher. Heavier substances condense lower down. Each temperature range yields a different product. Kerosene, the great lighting fuel of the 19th century, made up only about 10 to 25% of a barrel. The rest attracted far less interest. Among those neglected leftovers was a volatile mixture of light hydrocarbons with a low boiling point, quick to evaporate and dangerously flammable. Today people know it as gasoline. At first, gasoline seemed more troublesome than useful. It ignited violently. It was less safe than kerosene. In many places, it was dumped directly into the environment. Rivers that had once run clear developed oily films. The air around refineries thickened with chemical odor. A tiny spark could set off disaster, and often did. Many fires began exactly that way. Nearly everyone hated the non-kerosene fractions of crude. Everyone except Rockefeller. With his expanding fortune, he hired chemists to study every part of petroleum. Paraffin could be refined into cleaner, brighter candles. Other fractions became lubricants that kept machinery running. Even so, much of the light material from crude oil remained underused. The waste problem still lingered. waiting for another technological revolution to give it meaning. That revolution arrived in the form of the internal combustion engine. Toward the end of the 19th century, engineers began imagining vehicles that could move under their own power. But early internal combustion engines often relied on coal gas, and coal gas needed fixed supply systems. A machine could not truly be mobile if its fuel source remained tied to one place. As a result, many early engines stayed confined to workshops and small factories. The dream of personal transport seemed trapped. The real challenge was no longer simply the engine. It was storage and controlled release of energy. That is when gasoline began to look different. Its volatility, once purely a danger, also meant it vaporized easily under ordinary conditions. The problem was precision. If released badly, it exploded. If controlled correctly, it could drive motion. Engineers struggled with this for years without producing a design stable enough for wide practical use. Then came Karl Benz. Benz was born into a poor family in southwestern Germany. His father, a locomotive driver, died when Karl was still a boy. His mother, despite limited means, insisted that he receive an education. At 19, he graduated as a mechanical engineer. The world of transport at that time was trapped between two unsatisfying choices. Horses were slow, expensive, and filthy. Steam engines were heavy, cumbersome, and slow to start. Benz wanted something else, a compact machine that could start quickly and carry people over distance without horse or boiler. To pursue that vision, he opened a small mechanical workshop and began experimenting with internal combustion engines. The path was brutal. Business failures piled up, debts mounted. Yet even in his darkest periods, he did not abandon the central idea. Because of patent restrictions, Benz avoided the standard four-stroke cycle and explored a two-stroke design instead. In poverty, he was forced to learn by trial and error. Ignition systems, combustion chambers, cooling methods, each detail had to be tested, adjusted, and tested again. Then, on New Year's Eve, in 1879, the breakthrough came. His first successful two-stroke engine ran continuously with a steady rhythm. It was more than a technical success. It was proof that the broader dream might live. From there, he began envisioning a complete vehicle. To reduce the fire risk of gasoline, Benz developed a surface carburetor. This device allowed fuel to evaporate naturally and mix with air before entering the combustion chamber. Simple in concept, crucial in effect, it became a key to making the engine practical. Rather than modify a horse carriage, Benz chose to design an entirely new machine. He built a tubular steel frame, added wire-spoked wheels like those of a bicycle, and used a chain drive system for movement. In 1886, despite ridicule from those around him, he received a patent for the vehicle. But invention alone did not create acceptance. The market was skeptical. People feared the danger of gasoline. Sales were weak. Benz grew discouraged. At the most important moment, his wife Bertha proved more perceptive than anyone else. When Karl's path seemed blocked, Bertha proposed a long-distance journey to demonstrate the car's real value. He refused, believing the machine still too imperfect. Unable to persuade him, she acted on her own. On the morning of the 5th of August, 1888, before dawn, she quietly took the vehicle and left with their two sons. On the table, she left only a note, saying she was visiting her mother. She said nothing about how she intended to travel. The journey became legend not because it was smooth, but because it was not. Fuel lines clogged, and she cleared them with a hatpin. Ignition insulation needed repair, and she used fabric from her clothing. Chains and brakes failed, and she found local mechanics to mend them. The hardest problem was fuel. Gas stations did not yet exist. She had to stop at a pharmacy to buy Ligroin, a solvent that was effectively a crude gasoline product, then sold for cleaning purposes. When she reached her destination, she sent her husband a telegram. 3 days later, she returned by an even longer route, covering nearly 200 kilometers in total. The journey exposed the car's weaknesses clearly. It had only 2 forward gears, which made climbing hills difficult. Afterward, Karl Benz used her practical observations to improve the design. He added another gear and upgraded the braking system. The car became more usable in daily life, and public attention intensified. Soon, the first orders appeared. By the end of the 19th century, the company, built by Karl and Bertha Benz, had become the largest automobile manufacturer in the world. Today, it is known as Mercedes-Benz. And so, gasoline, once discarded as a dangerous waste product, began its quiet invasion of global life. That invasion accelerated when Henry Ford introduced the Model T in 1908. Cheap, mass-produced, and practical, it transformed the automobile from an elite novelty into a common machine of the street. By 1910, for the first time in history, revenue from gasoline exceeded revenue from kerosene. Petroleum's role shifted. It was no longer chiefly the fuel that lit the world. It had become the energy that allowed humanity to move through it. But oil's influence would climb to an even higher level after the outbreak of the Second World War. One of petroleum's great wartime powers lay not only in fuel, but in chemistry. Modern war consumed rubber on a staggering scale. Tires for military trucks, aircraft, tanks, boots, clothing, seals, hoses, and equipment all depended on it. Before the war, the United States was the largest consumer of rubber in the world, and 96% of its supply came from Southeast Asia. Then came Pearl Harbor. Within weeks, Japan extended control across the region and effectively cut off the world's main rubber supply. A material that had once seemed merely useful became strategically vital. A military aircraft needed hundreds of pounds of rubber. Heavy armored forces required many times more. Even an ordinary soldier needed around 14 pounds of rubber in footwear, clothing, and personal equipment. If scientists could not replace nearly 1 million tons of lost natural rubber, America would face failure. Germany had moved earlier. It had successfully developed synthetic Buna rubber, highly resistant to wear, and ideal for armored vehicles and military tires. One route to producing a key ingredient, butadiene, had previously relied on heating coal in large furnaces, an energy-intensive and expensive process difficult to scale. But German chemists at IG Farben developed a petrochemical route using activated clay as a catalyst, making butadiene production far easier. Petroleum held one enormous advantage over coal. It was liquid. It could be moved through pipelines and processed continuously in large industrial systems. That made vast petrochemical complexes possible. Germany, however, still relied heavily on coal because it lacked sufficient oil. America was in a different position. By the 1940s and 1950s, oil refining was expanding rapidly to meet fuel demand for cars and airplanes. As more crude was processed, more byproducts appeared, including C4 gases that could serve as feedstock for butadiene. In the face of emergency, President Roosevelt launched a massive synthetic rubber program. Yet he understood that if companies were left to compete privately and secretly, production targets would fail. So the United States created a National Rubber Administration. Rather than fully nationalize the industry, the government built a partnership between state and private enterprise. It spent around $700 million constructing 51 synthetic rubber plants across the country, while allowing major private firms to operate them. In return, those firms had to share patents and technical secrets, a remarkable step taken to accelerate wartime production. The situation was complicated further by earlier ties between Standard Oil of the United States and IG Farben of Germany. Before the war, they had exchanged patents, allowing foundational Buna knowledge to reach Standard Oil. Once war erupted, accusations of betrayal surfaced because of those continued links. the U.S. government intervened. Relevant patents were forced into wider domestic sharing, while Standard Oil still played a central role in executing the national-scale production program. The results were enormous. In less than 4 years, through petrochemical mastery, oil ceased to be merely a fuel to burn. It became a pillar of industrial capacity itself, helping shape the manufacturing power of a superpower at war. But when the war ended, another problem appeared. During those same years, petrochemical plants had also been producing huge volumes of a plastic material called polyethylene. In wartime, it had been useful as an insulating material for radar and cable coatings in aircraft. When peace returned, military demand vanished, and polyethylene suddenly seemed excessive. Worse, disposal posed a problem people did not yet know how to solve. The language of biodegradability had not entered public consciousness. These plastics were stubborn. They did not rot like wood. They did not rust like steel. Thrown into nature, they remained there, altering soil structure, preventing plants from growing normally, and clogging natural water flow. To most people, polyethylene looked like another form of industrial waste. Then one chemist saw something else. Earl Tupper, who had worked with plastic materials connected to DuPont, understood their hidden potential. He bought the material cheaply and took it into the small laboratory inside his own home. There he and his son worked quietly, refining it, removing odor, adjusting molecular structure step by step. Failure came often, but each failure revealed something. Eventually, the rough and nearly worthless material became a smooth, glossy plastic of remarkable quality. Tupper did not stop at the material itself. He looked at the post-war kitchen, where food spoilage was common and preservation methods remained clumsy. Could plastic help there too? Inspired by paint cans, he designed a flexible polyethylene lid that would push air out when pressed and produce a soft sigh-like sound as it sealed. It worked better than foil or improvised covers commonly used to protect food. In 1947, he received a patent for the solution. Later, the world would know it as Tupperware. Yet, the great obstacle was not chemistry. It was trust. American households still preferred glass and metal. Plastic seemed cheap, unstable, and unsafe. Tupper's products sat ignored on store shelves. He understood then that his containers could not be sold like ordinary goods. They had to be demonstrated. That insight found its perfect partner in Brownie Wise, a brilliant marketer in Florida who recognized that customers needed to feel the product with their own hands. And so the Tupperware party was born. Instead of waiting on store shelves, the product entered living rooms and dining tables. In a warm social atmosphere, a host would perform little acts of persuasion. The container could be dropped without shattering. It could be turned upside down without leaking a drop. Vegetables stayed fresh longer. Suspicion slowly gave way to curiosity, and curiosity to confidence. Through these simple gatherings, plastic found its place in the household. Something that had once looked like war waste quietly entered the kitchens of millions. And capitalism, of course, had no intention of stopping there. After 2 decades soaked in blood and grief, the post-war world longed for comfort, convenience, beauty, and abundance. Manufacturers rushed to redesign products for this new desire. Objects once expensive and reserved for the upper class were reborn in cheaper, brighter, more playful forms. Steel components gave way in some cases to polypropylene. Aviation ceased to be a strange spectacle on rural fields and became a vast industry powered by jet fuel and built partly from petrochemical materials. Reading glasses shifted from fragile glass lenses toward plastics. Bicycle helmets and protective gear became common. Bicycles themselves changed with synthetic rubber tires and glossy chemical-derived components. Even food entered petrochemical logic. Artificial colors and additives derived through petroleum-linked chemistry found their way into gelatin desserts, cereals, juice drinks, salad dressings, cookies, and countless processed goods. Cosmetics followed the same path. The public did not see crude oil named on a label, of course. By then it had been cleaned, refined, and transformed into something with a gentler name. Compounds such as liquid paraffin and petrolatum appeared in creams, lipsticks, mascara, and hair care products. The effects were immediate enough to persuade millions, and yet a question lingers there, more unsettling than the earlier ones. If so many products contain substances derived from petroleum, what does that mean for the human body? The answer is not simple. Manufacturers insist that the ingredients are purified and that small amounts may not cause obvious harm. At the same time, scientists have raised concerns about impurities generated during production and about long-term exposure to certain compounds. The story of petroleum is therefore not a fairy tale with a clean moral. It is a story of usefulness, ingenuity, convenience, danger, waste, power, and compromise, all at once. From kerosene lamps to automobile engines, from tank tires to white plastic food containers, oil has changed shape again and again since leaving the darkness underground. Each age looked at it differently, first as a nuisance, then as light, then as motion, then as military strength, then as packaging, cosmetics, convenience, and the hidden chemistry of modern living. And perhaps that is the clearest lesson in the whole story. In the hands of people with enough vision, even something once dismissed as filthy waste can be transformed into a force that reorganizes the world. Oil did not become powerful because it was beautiful. It became powerful because human beings learned, 1 century at a time, how to turn every unwanted part of it into something the world believed it needed.
Thanks for watching Chupbi English Story. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss the next one. See you soon.